The December wind tore apart Jake Walker's old denim jacket like a knife as he stooped over the pram. The streets of Cleveland were aglow with holiday lights as he protected his 2-year-old daughter Ella from the freezing winds while they awaited the crosswalk signal. But Jake, a 33-year-old single father, was unaffected by the enchantment. Jake had been struggling for 3 months, barely making ends meet, working odd jobs and selling his truck down to a small studio in order to provide Ella with food. His armor was rusty and dented, but it was still intact. That night, for the third time in a week, Jake saw her huddled beneath a bus stop bench, arms wrapped around her, eyes closed but never sleeping. The woman had a mid-40s face. Pale lips, blue half-to-backpack, sat beside her, clutched as if it held her last breath. Most people passed by without a glance, but Jake couldn't leave. "Ma'am," he continued, bending down next to her, "there is a shelter here, because it's too cold outside." Without lifting her eyes, she muttered, "Full? They're all full." When Ella sneezed behind him, a tiny, wet sound sent a shockwave through him. "I've got a couch," he replied, "and soup, not much else, but it's warm." He hesitated, and every sensible voice cried out that he had enough on his plate, that letting a stranger into their home was perilous, dangerous even. With red-rimmed eyes, the woman said, "You don't even know my name." Jake smiled softly and said, "I don't need to." Her name was Mara, and she had lost her husband to a tragic heart attack during a snowfall 2 months earlier. She had no savings or insurance. When the landlord discovered that she was unable to pay, he changed the locks on the room they had rented above a bookstore. When she returned from the hospital, there was only a bag of clothes left on the porch in Jake's small apartment. She moved in quietly, folding laundry and doing the dishes as if she were returning a favor, and within a week, Ella was clinging to him like a second mother. Jake also felt something new in his bones for the first time in years. Peace, Dan arrived. Next, and on a Wednesday morning, 2 officers arrived. "We have a warrant for your arrest," an officer said as Mara stood behind Jake, clutching Ella, her face turning pale once more, "Ma'am." Jake rushed between them out of reflex. "What for what?" he asked. The news that Mara had missed a court date devastated him. She had no idea of the court summons that had been delivered to the former home over outstanding bills and an old dispute over a joint credit account that her late spouse had opened. The following day, Jake took her to court by himself. Wearing his only collared shirt, Mara held Ella while she trembled in the waiting area until they called her name. In addition, an odd thing happened. The judge halted, his gaze swept the chamber, and he asked Jake, "You brought her here?" He said slowly. Jake gave a nod. She didn't run, she didn't hide, she just didn't have anywhere to get the notice. "What's your name, sir?" the judge asked, leaning forward with an unreadable expression. "Jake Walker." The courtroom was silent for a moment, and then the judge stood. The clerk even stopped typing. "I knew a Walker once." The judge's voice was husky as he stated, "James Walker, a Vietnam veteran, saved my life when our convoy was attacked in 1969, and I've spent 50 years wishing I could thank him." Breathing deeply, Jake said, "James was my father, sir." "Well, then let's take a moment before we proceed," the judge said as he gently sat back down. Mara was released without incident. The judge referred to the case as a bureaucratic mess when it was dismissed for lack of sufficient cause. But it was more than that. It was a moment of full-circle grace. A son raised by a war hero had quietly continued the legacy of compassion, and a woman who had been on the verge of being crushed by the system found safety because of the kindness her husband had shown her half a century earlier. A few months later, Jake secured a stable job at the judge's friend's repair shop, and Mara enrolled in community college to become a nurse. They co-parented Ella as if it were the most natural thing in the world, not bound by blood, but by choice. They weren't a traditional family, but they were a real one. Jake took Ella and Mara to the same bench at the bus stop each Christmas thereafter. When the city's lights came on, they'd lay a blanket and a thermos of soup beside it, just in case someone else needed a second chance, because sometimes the most extraordinary stories are revealed by the smallest acts of kindness, and sometimes a judge stands in silence, not out of authority, but out of awe that winter melted into spring, and with it so did some of the heaviness Jake had carried for years. Mara moved from the couch to the pull-out bed, and eventually they found a 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town. Nothing fancy peeling paint, a stubborn faucet, but it had sunlight in the mornings and a little fenced yard where Ella could run barefoot in the grass. Now Mara cooks frequently. Jake came home to the smell of lentil stew or baked chicken, and Ella's giggles bouncing off the walls. The three of them were moving in a quiet, easy, unspoken rhythm. Jake never asked Mara to stay. She said she wouldn't, however, neither of them went. Jake found Mara on the porch in June, barefoot, staring at the stars after putting Ella to sleep. She asked him without looking at him, "You ever think how close we came to never meeting?" "All the time," he said, taking a seat next to her. "I used to think the world was full of people who wouldn't care, but now I think it's just full of people waiting for someone else to care first," he said, turning to face him with watery eyes in the porch light. Jake simply reached out, took her hand, and held it. The following morning, a letter from the judge arrived. It was a handwritten note that said, "Your father would be proud." Jake was reminded that justice is more than just rules. It's a daily one, and he thanked her for making it. Below the note was a printed scholarship form addressed to Ella Walker, to be held in trust until she turned 18. Jake stared at the letter for a while before entering the living room, where Mara was getting Ella ready for daycare. "She's going to be okay," he whispered, and Mara looked up. "Yeah, she really is." They had a home now, not just a roof, and they had each other. In a world where kindness frequently feels like a risk, Jake had taken a chance and, in return, found not just redemption, but a future stitched with hope, even though there were still bills, late nights, and occasional moments of fear.